A few times now I've done a couple videos about country rivalries, but in all of these I limited the listing of rivalries to those within the same continent. In this video, I want to do something slightly different and open this up to the entire world, talking about countries that dislike each other on more of an international level, although to be fair, many of these are in fact neighboring or at least in the same continent, but at least we can include various continents' rivalries in the same video. We're going to take a look at 8 different pairs of countries that dislike each other, understanding why this rivalry exists, how far it goes, and what it would perhaps take for it to be resolved. A quick disclaimer, the usage of the phrase countries that dislike each other doesn't necessarily mean a deep hatred between nations or any real conflict in some cases, just specific rivalries that exist between two nations or its people for various reasons. There's also a large amount of pairs of countries we could use for this. I randomly chose 8 I found interesting for this video. Let me know in the comments if there are any others you would like me to cover. Starting with the ones on the thumbnail, India and Pakistan. Their rivalry can be summarized to one main issue: Kashmir. Their conflict started after the partition of India in 1947. After the end of World War II, European powers began decolonizing many of their overseas territories, and such was the case for the British Raj, which was made up of what is today Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, and a couple other territories. Upon independence, both India and Pakistan claimed the entirety of the former princely states of Jammu and Kashmir. This came at a time when the princely states of the former British Raj were given instruments to be included in these new nations. The dispute over the region escalated into 3 wars between India and Pakistan over time, and several other armed skirmishes. A de facto line of control has been established, but both countries claimed the entirety of the region. Then China also jumped in, claiming a part of the territory, so there are more players at stake other than just the 2 countries, which might make it more difficult to settle. There's also the religious issue of one country being mainly Muslim and the other being mainly Hindu. To the northwest, we have another one, Armenia and Azerbaijan. These 2 countries dislike each other mainly due to one territorial dispute as well, over the territory of Nagorno-Karabakh, inhabited by ethnic Armenians but ruled by Azerbaijan. Oddly enough, Azerbaijan has its own disconnected exclave within Armenia too, although they rule it and not Armenia. One wonders if this issue couldn't be fixed by simply exchanging the territories and migrating the people from one to the other, but then again, I'm ignorant on the subject. The conflict has its origins in the early 20th century, but the present conflict began in 1988 when the Karabakh Armenians demanded transferring Karabakh from Soviet Azerbaijan to Soviet Armenia when both were a part of the USSR. The reason for the transfer request seems to have been precisely the existence of a large Armenian community within the territory. The conflict escalated into a full-scale war in the early 1990s, which later transformed into a low-intensity conflict in April of 2016, and then in 2020, actual conflict and war took place. Right now, it seems to have de-escalated into mostly a border conflict. These first 2 were within the same continent, but the next one is truly an intercontinental one. Before we go on with the video, I want to thank the sponsor of this video and great friend of the channel, Blinkist. Blinkist is an app that allows you to read and learn even when you might not have the time to do it. What they do is great because they take thousands of non-fiction books and summarize their content into short, around 15 minutes, listening or reading sessions. If you are a regular watcher of the channel, you already know this, but I'm not only sponsored by them, I'm actually also a user of their app. Right now, I'm listening to the series on German philosophers where you can read or listen to the insight of precisely a number of German philosophers about specific topics like Schopenhauer or Nietzsche. At the moment, I'm listening to The Origins of Totalitarianism by Hannah Arendt. Hers is divided into 8 key ideas in only 19 minutes. And they also have a gigantic catalog for you to choose from. If you want to try it out, go to blinkist.com/general knowledge and you'll get 1 free week to try it out and then 25% off if you want to continue on with your membership. The United Kingdom and Argentina. The issue between the UK and Argentina is odd. Why would 2 countries so far away from each other with very little common history have any problem with each other? It all has to do with a set of islands off the Argentine coast, the Falkland Malvina Islands. I guess whichever name you use depends on which side you support. It began in 1982, when the British islands were occupied by Argentina. The UK responded and defeated the Argentines in a war that lasted for 74 days. The reason for Argentina's invasion was that, and they still maintain this claim as far as I could find out, the islands are Argentine territory, and the Argentine government thus characterized its military action as the reclamation of its own land and not an invasion, which is obviously how the British saw it. But the island was inhabited by descendants of British settlers since the 19th century and strongly favors British sovereignty per a 1986 referendum where UK rule won with 96%. So why do the Argentinians claim it? Argentina says it has a right to the islands because they would have inherited them from the Spanish crown in the early 1800s when the South Americans achieved their independence. They claim the British simply occupied them ever since, ignoring the legal ownership. Neither state officially declared war at the time, although both governments declared the islands a war zone. Diplomatic relations between the UK and Argentina were restored in 1989 following a meeting in Madrid. But no change in either country's position was made. In 1994, Argentina adopted a new constitution which declared the Falkland Islands as a part of one of its provinces by law. However, they continue to be ruled by the British today. One major country rivalry is Serbia and Kosovo, whose issues go back to the problem between Serbia and Albania. Kosovo was, until fairly recently, a part of Serbia, only achieving independence in 2006 and mainly against Serbian will. 90% of Kosovo's population is Albanian, which caused Albania to intervene in the conflict that happened at Kosovo's side against Serbia. Because of this and many other historic reasons, the relationship between Serbia and these two others isn't the best. The Serbian problem towards Kosovo seems to be simply the fact that they lost that territory, which they believe is rightfully theirs, but it's all part of a greater issue between them and Albania that goes back hundreds of years, with focus on the Balkan Wars, Serbian rule over Albanian populated areas, and even the rule of the Ottoman Empire over both their territories. And another pair of countries that partially dislike each other are Vietnam and Cambodia. And like always, it has to do with history. Any two countries that exist next to each other, save specific exceptions, will likely have a history of conflict between them. That's also the case with these two. We could start even earlier on, but one specific conflict that started forging not so good relations between the two were the Vietnamese invasions of Cambodia in 1811. Further ahead, there was the Vietnam War, in which South Vietnam was supported by the United States and, you guessed it, Cambodia too. North Vietnam won, and the regime today is a successor of that belligerent, so it makes sense that they didn't love someone who recently tried to help defeat them. The Vietnam War ended in 1975, and in 1979 Cambodia and Vietnam themselves went to war, where I believe Vietnam helped Cambodian revolutionaries take control of the country and create the People's Republic of Kampuchea, which lasted for 10 years. Today, those military issues seem thankfully resolved, but some issues might remain on either side. Moving to Africa, Eritrea and Ethiopia also have some issues with each other, mostly regarding their borders. On this map, we can see the disputed areas highlighted in green and red. From 1961 until 1991, Eritrea had fought a war of independence against Ethiopia. In the meantime, Ethiopia faced an internal conflict in which one side allied itself with the Eritreans. After the war, both winning sides couldn't agree on what the border of their states should be. Because of this, a second war began in 1998 until 2000, being tragically devastating. Peace was finally reached in 2018, but issues over the occupation of some territories remain, and relations between the two countries are not yet ideal. All the way in South America, a rivalry exists between Chile and Peru. Their dispute goes back to the late 19th century, and it has to do with a third country, Bolivia. Bolivia wasn't always a landlocked country, and throughout time, it eventually lost parts of its land to its neighbors. At one point, they shared a part of the Pacific coast with Chile. Both of them wanted exclusive ownership, and so they went to war for it, with Peru joining on Bolivia's side. This was in 1879. However, even against two nations, Chile was victorious, annexing the full coastline and even parts of Peru itself. Over 100 years later, Chile still owns much of that territory, and Peruvian people seem to still not like that. Legal battles between the two nations continue, especially over maritime disputes. In late 2009, Chile did a military exercise which concerned the Peruvian government due to the scenario they used of a northern country attacking a southern one. Both Peru and Bolivia are the northern neighbors of Chile, but still, despite these troubles, they live in peace, and all we can do is hope that it will remain the case. Finally, going back to Europe, Hungary and Romania. Hungary and Romania have a pretty peaceful coexistence as bordering countries in Europe. They're also both part of the European Union, so it would be impossible for them to be at war or any type of serious conflict, but historically they have somewhat of a large rivalry and a conflict that shows itself through small details and events throughout time. It's all about Transylvania and the loss of this territory by Hungary to Romania, which today controls it. Many Hungarians, including some governments, still see it as a territory which should rightfully be theirs, because it was until 1920, with many Hungarians at the time moving or already living in the region. Today, apparently 1 million ethnic Hungarians still live in this region, despite now being Romanian on their passports. Most of them are even concentrated within a part of Romania, Szekely. The claim of Hungary over these territories is far from gone. In fact, the Hungarian government recently passed a law giving citizenship to all ethnic Hungarians in Europe, which means that the Szekely people are now Hungarian citizens as well. Every now and then there are provocations on each side, like Romania celebrating the annexation or Hungary reaffirming their claim that the territory should still be theirs. So, those are few countries worldwide that dislike each other, some caused by more recent conflicts, other by ancient issues, and some by continuous ones that are yet to be resolved. Thankfully, most of these at the moment haven't materialized into anything too serious, and we can only hope that they don't, and that any type of disliking or rivalry is always resolved in a friendly manner through diplomacy and words rather than weapons. There is a vast list of countries that have rivalries for whichever reason, which we can consider as countries that dislike each other. So if this video does well and you guys are interested, I can totally do a part 2 of it. Thanks so much for watching this video. Subscribe if you want, and I will see you next time for more general knowledge.